Hey folks, Sid Smith here with Daily Hypervisor, and we're back looking at Firefly. In our last video, we onboarded an AWS account as well as a GitHub account, and Firefly has completed its scan. It's actually been long completed, but we can see here that it did detect that 58.82% of my environment is codified and 48.18% is not codified. 10 new, a total of 10 over here and a total of 7 over here, none new in the past week. If I go and look at my inventory, I can now see I no longer have those hashed lines around unmanaged. Firefly finished its scan, determined that these resources are not managed by infrastructure as code, but determined that these other resources are. So if we were to take a look at one of these resources here, we can see I've got an EC2 instance. It's running in US East, has some properties, a tag associated with it. And then we see these two boxes down here. One is governance. If we take a look, I can see that it's an EC2 instance that has a public IP address. So that's a policy violation based on one of the out-of-the-box policies. And then I can expand IaC stacks and see where the state file is that this resource was detected in. Something else I can tell about this resource is although it found it in a state file, it did not find any code that manages this resource in the GitHub repository. Otherwise, I would have a third box here showing me that. If we move down just a little bit, we'll see the configuration as it stands in the public cloud in JSON format here. So what metadata surrounds this resource in the public cloud that we were able to pull down from the provider. There's a comments area here where if you're making changes or things you want to denote about the resource here in Firefly, you can add comments. And then we can see any relationships that might exist. And here we can see the EC2 instance does have a network interface as well as an EBS volume. And in this view, you can also select and view the configuration of these different elements by just going ahead and clicking on them. From there, we have two options down here, codify or migrate. And if we go to codify, we haven't talked or looked at this yet, but we're going to be doing quite a bit around the codification feature in Firefly. We're going to codify those unmanaged resources, and we're going to look at codifying them in different ways. To give you a little bit of a preview on that section, here we can see when it came up, it generated some Terraform or OpenTofu, whichever flavor you're running, but it generated some HCL for the resource. Very static, very explicit, but very useful if we're just trying to get the resources under the management of infrastructure as code and have some code that we can use to modify the resource moving forward. We can include the import blocks. So we can go ahead and run this code, do our plan and apply, and not have Terraform or OpenTofu try and create this resource, but simply import it for state management. If you're not worried about generating code, but just want to get these things under state management, they also provide the import commands, especially if you're running a version of Terraform prior to 1.5 when that feature for the import blocks was released. You can also select under basic to codify using data sources. And this is more along the lines of what you might expect. We've got some variable placeholders here for the VPC and those types of things. And then we're looking up those relevant values from that resource itself. Now, there is some additional advanced capabilities that can be used as well, especially if you've got an environment that's heavily uncodified and you're looking to get resources as well as their dependencies codified to get all of those things in your environment up to 100% code. You can leverage some of these additional capabilities like codifying unmanaged dependencies. And what that does is it looks for any of the dependencies that aren't already declared in code, and we'll codify them if they need to be codified as well. And then another option here is codify all dependencies. And this is a great way to get a backup, if you will, for what the configuration of this resource and all of its dependencies are. It's also a great way to generate the code if I want to take and deploy a resource like this into another account or another region. I can go make a few changes to the code and set it up to deploy to whatever region I want and account for all of the dependencies that go with it. And then we can also, I'm going to skip over this one for a second, create a module from this resource. So if you're looking to create a repeatable way to codify additional resources based on a template, we can codify that module up. And what's nice is it'll give you the main.tf with your different components, your different resources that need to be codified. And then also some additional things like an example of how to call the module, codifies the outputs for you, provider declaration, and the variable inputs. And what's really nice, all the different capabilities here, is you can either just download the code, you can copy it into your clipboard, or you can open a pull request into Git. So if you remember, we connected a Git repo. I can come here, select my VCS, select the repo, select Firefly, select my branch. I can give it a path, a folder path, even a file name. In this case, if it's a module, I probably just want to give it a path. And then I can say create. Now it's going to go open a pull request with Git. It's all done. I can even go ahead, click this link, and go take a look at the pull request that was created. So we're going to dig a bit deeper into that in another session. But for now, some pretty cool stuff. Another area that we'll dig into in another video is the cloud migration, where if I wanted to take this EC2 resource and codify maybe a Google Cloud instance or an Azure Linux virtual machine with the same parameters, we can generate the code for that as well. Or Firefly can generate the code for that as well. You'll also notice across the top there's additional IaC languages that can be codified into. So Firefly can go ahead and codify using the Terraform CDK. You'll notice you get some of those other advanced options here as well. And then different language options. So where we see TypeScript very frequently, maybe you want to codify for Python, as well as if you're a Pulumi user, or if you're leveraging and want to continue to leverage CloudFormation because you're all AWS. Even creating Ansible for those folks that are leveraging Ansible to provision and manage their infrastructure. We'll take a quick look at IaC Explorer to see what it discovered out in the environment from a state file and repo perspective. So I have 2 state files. These state files are looking really good, 100% codified, no drift. I can see 5 assets managed by this one and 4 assets managed by the FlyGPT state file. And if you recall, I can select these and go and see those specific assets. Here I've got an EC2 instance, security group VPC and subnet, all codified and managed by that state file. Move on, we can see the only provider in use is the AWS provider. I have 1 backend on AWS, a number of Terraform modules that it detected out in my repositories. Some have policy violations. So if we take a look at this, table encryption is not enabled. No public access blocks, or not blocking public ACLs. So a number of violations that I'll probably want to address within some of these modules, but we'll get there in some additional videos. And then the repos that were found, and we have the 3 repos that we saw in that drop down previously. One repo's got 44 modules and the other one has 2. No code in the repository managing any of the resources. So I'm probably going to want to get that fixed. If I have the code, I can certainly check it in and upload it. And if I don't, I can leverage Firefly to generate the code and get that into the repositories. But we'll tackle that in another video. Just wanted to give a little bit more of a view as to what Firefly discovered initially after onboarding that single AWS account and that GitHub resource. Stay tuned, more to come.